In this lecture, we're going to talk about domain and range from a graph and a function. The first thing I want to do is talk about domain in all of these examples. Domain is going to be all of your x values. So take a look at the graph. Notice here that this is the x-axis, and I want to see where does the graph cross all of the x values. So if I put a point right here on the graph, I can go down and touch the x-axis. Same thing right here, same thing right here. Now if I come over here, there is no graph, therefore it doesn't touch the x-axis. So between which points does the graph touch the x-axis? Well, that's going to be between -4, because that's right here, and 5, which is right here. So to write your domain, you're going to say x is going to be less than 5 because it goes down, but x is going to be greater than -4. Now, if you have any questions on how I wrote this, please feel free to ask. Now, to find the domain of functions, you need to figure out where do x values not work. Well, let's take a look at this last one here. What I want you to notice is the division sign. If you remember, you cannot take a number on top and divide by 0. So you need to ask yourself, what value of x would make the bottom part 0? Well, that would be -5. So because you have -5 plus 5, that would be 0, and you can't divide by 0. So you're going to say that your domain is all real numbers except x cannot equal -5. Now take a look at the middle function. Ask yourself, what x values can I plug in, then square that number, then multiply by 4, and finally subtract 1. Which x values? I don't know, let's pick one. Let's pick 3. So let's pretend I plug in 3. 3 squared is 9. 9 times 4 is 36. 36 minus 1 is going to be 35. You can keep trying numbers, but every single number I plug in is going to get me an answer at the end. So that means my domain is going to be all real numbers. Last but not least, the first function. I have this square root. One thing that you should know is that you cannot take the square root of a negative number. So what would make this a negative number? If I plugged in 8, 8 minus 7 would be 1. And if you took your calculator and took the square root of 1, you would get an answer. Now, what if you took the square root of 7 minus 7? That would be the square root of 0. And if you took your calculator, you would get a number, you would get an answer for the square root of 0. So that works. What if you did, let's try 6.5 minus 7. Now if you did 6.5 minus 7, you would get the square root of -0.5. Well, remember, you cannot take the square root of a negative number. So you need to ask yourself, what x values would be the domain? Well, if I plugged in 7, I get 0. But if I plug in 6.5, I get a negative number. So my domain is going to be all real numbers, and x has to be greater than or equal to 7. If you plug in a number less than 7, the function doesn't work. Now let's talk about the range. And we're going to talk about the range with the graph and the functions. So just like the domain, the range is going to be all of your y values. So taking a look at the graph, we're going to do the same thing. Find a point on the graph, and does it touch the y-axis? And everywhere you go, does it touch the y-axis? So, what is the highest point? That's going to be 4. And what is the lowest point? That's going to be 0. So your y value has to be less than 4, but greater than 0. Again, if you have a question about how I wrote this, please ask. Now let's talk about finding the range of the functions. In order to find the range, it's really going to help you if you can graph this and then figure out what the y values are. To graph it, get a graphing calculator and type it in under the y equals button. If you need help, ask a teacher. Now, if you can do it with the functions, just by looking at them, that's going to be a lot easier. So with the range, I know that that's all my y values. So because a square root graph starts at 0 and goes up, I know that my range is going to be all real numbers for the y. Let's talk about the second function. Because it's a square, I know that the graph is going to look like a parabola. And I know that a parabola has a range of all real numbers. But you also have to figure out where the bottom point is for the y-axis. Now, because this says -1, I know that it goes down 1. So that means my range is all real numbers, and y has to be greater than or equal to -1. To find the range of the third function, you're going to take your numerator and set it equal to 0. Now, if there were a variable, you would solve for it. So ask yourself, does 0 equal 6? The answer is no. So your range is going to be all real numbers, except y cannot equal 0.